Remember when Ubisoft lied to you about the downgrade of Watch Dogs? It definitely feels like history has repeated itself, with CD Projekt Red misleading both consumers and their investors during the development and release of Cyberpunk 2077. Hey, what's going on guys? I'm Brett Madigan and welcome back to Mad Again. Remember their original bad boy marketing approach? Coming when it's ready? That showed that the developer actually gave a shit about the player's experience, but it doesn't matter now if the game is the highest grossing single player game of all time. It's also being labeled as the most unfinished video game of the decade. So to those that were saying a delayed game means more time for optimization or whatever other bullshit people were saying about a delayed game, I'm happy to finally say you're totally and utterly fucking wrong. Now, with a proven example. At this point, it's easy to blame upper management with the immense pressure of releasing it on multiple platforms. I count at least 7. Or the power struggle from their investors to get the product out the door before Christmas. This behavior isn't acceptable. We, the players, don't deserve this. We've waited 8 years. We could have waited longer. When you spend money on a product, you expect it to work, and shouldn't be expected to require a supercomputer to run it. Unless you have a potato PC, then it's your fault. I like to think of it like this. If you buy a coffee machine, you don't expect it to randomly start making coffee at 3 AM, or disable itself until you unplug it and plug it back in. No, we don't expect anything we buy to behave irregularly. Whether it's intentional or not, the "we'll fix it after release" mentality with video games needs to stop. It's not okay, and I'm sick of it.
Could have warned me how much it hurts to die.
So how do we get to a place where a developer doesn't even bother to optimize a platform's base console, and completely dismisses its existence? Then misleads everyone during certification into thinking that it would be fixed before release. I'm sorry, but your game that's printed on my PS4 disc, version 1.0, was absolutely broken on the original PS4. With a horribly upscaled resolution, terrible frame rate that feels sub 15 FPS, and broken animations. This is not what's deemed as gold at all. Realistically, this feels more alpha stage of development. The state of Cyberpunk 2077 across all platforms is an utter joke, and definitely something to be ashamed of. The developer clearly knew the game wasn't ready, but chose to lie to everyone, including you. I'm probably the only person on the planet that wasn't excited by this game. So then why do I even care if the game is broken or deemed unfinished by consumers? It's the principle of it. Someone paying full price for a broken game that was in development for 8 fucking years is utterly disgusting behavior. Besides that, the gameplay trailers looked very generic and didn't grasp my interest at all. What did was the inclusion of cool cutscenes that would have helped to portray the narrative. This sort of stuff is what pulls me into an open world RPG. CD Projekt Red seem to have taken their storytelling roots and forgotten how to make a compelling RPG after making The Witcher 3. I really thought I'd be using this game as a punch to Rockstar over Red Dead 2's horrible optimization. Sadly, that's not happening either. Such a shame, I was really looking forward to that. Let's find out how broken, what happened to Cyberpunk 2077 on PC. I want to try and diagnose from the outside what may have caused the game to suffer from the dreaded nature of overscoping and overpromising on such a highly anticipated project like this, and what the damage that behavior has led to. So I have a few theories. Let's discuss. I believe there's 3 main pillars that led to Cyberpunk's downfall, which are changing the rendering API from DX11 to DX12 to force ray tracing onto consumers, shifting the focus from last gen to next gen consoles, and redesigning the city landscape. I'll be the first to say these ideas are based on opinion and hold no true facts. I don't necessarily understand what goes into the process of each of these, however I do know these elements would have drastically changed the performance outcome, which would have led to the game being delayed multiple times, with improper or rushed QA. We have to keep in mind, the game was in development for 8 years. It doesn't matter if that was conceptual or prototyping, it took 8 years from announcement to retail. Don't get me wrong, CD Projekt Red have fucked up royally here, and their global reputation has been utterly destroyed. So here's my theory for what led to their demise. Like many things, changing the rendering API from DX11 to DX12 midway through development is probably not the smartest dumbest thing to do, especially when the only benefit was ray tracing. It's clear that this was a last-minute thrown together solution. We can have an educated guess that because Cyberpunk 2077 was teased in 2013, and with DX12 being announced in 2014, then officially released in 2015, with Windows 10 giving the developer 2 years to work with DX11 before The Witcher 3 was released. I'd guess that sometime between 2015 and 2018 was when DX11 was replaced with DX12. Given the game's performance, this would make sense, forcing their employees to work in overdrive to pump out a working version with the DX12 API. Doesn't sound like it would benefit them much, until we associate ray tracing with DX12. If we take a look at the game's lighting and shadows on Ultra without ray tracing, shadows don't behave correctly at all, nor does the in-game lighting. My guess is that with the inclusion of ray tracing, they had to rework and rebake the entire game's lighting, which couldn't be fixed before launch, and hasn't been touched thereafter. Look, I don't have any issues with a game having ray tracing. By all means, add it to the game, but never, under any circumstances, make it a priority or a requirement for correctly lighting a scene. At least, not a launch priority, you know? At the end of the day, was DX12 really a requirement for Cyberpunk 2077 if it doesn't run well with or without ray tracing? Absolutely not. Personally, I believe the DX12 API should have been scrapped to save on development hell later on, aka the shitty launch we see today. They should have focused on getting the look they desired without relying on something as resource heavy as ray tracing. We as players don't need it, at least not right away. It should have been an afterthought and not a focus, especially for an open world game with many reflective surfaces. That shit will take a lot to optimize for, and clearly that was disregarded before launch. Changing the focus from last-gen to next-gen consoles is a little disappointing, with every trailer prior to 2019 not even showing which platform we are watching was already quite alarming. I'd say that sometime between 2018 and 2019 was when development shifted to prioritizing next-gen performance, which left last-gen optimization in the dust. Seeing as it was labeled as a PS4 and Xbox One title in 2019, nobody was expecting a next-gen version. At least, not this soon. So why that became a priority, don't know. CD Projekt Red further hit themselves in the foot by showing PS4 Pro and PS5 footage, but still zero base PS4 or Xbox One footage. We clearly know why. From all of this, it appears that in order to keep everything streamlined, the developer must have chosen to keep the same version across all platforms, bearing in mind that consoles also running x86, similar to PCs. However, making it work correctly clearly wasn't their priority, which makes no sense due to adding more stress to their employees over the discrepancies across all platforms, especially last gen. By now, we're probably already aware that all next-gen games are designed to load in a certain way, in order to cut down loading times, right? Not just the fact that they use SSDs now, but basically the game would have to be written completely different to conventional games. So if this feature wasn't accounted for with the PS4 and Xbox One version, we'd expect to have a lot of issues, which is true. Okay, so loading the game faster doesn't answer much, but what if I told you that the PS4 and Xbox One versions aren't ruined by terrible hardware? They're ruined based on priorities. Last gen doesn't use an SSD, therefore loads the textures slower, right? Here's a look at the PS4 version with both a hard drive and SSD, although running the original PS4 with an SSD doesn't change the overall performance. However, it does change the frequency in which you see those terrible looking textures, so it's doing something, just not exactly what we want it to do. Now here's a look at the PS4 Pro version with a hard drive and SSD. This game showcases perfectly exactly why I hated the fact that PS4 Pro and Xbox One X were even announced. This means that developers prioritize the higher performing console over the base version, and in this case, that's exactly what happened. I haven't seen anyone in the media reporting the same issues on PC when using a hard drive. This notion that every PC gamer uses an SSD is complete and utter bullshit. I have over 7 terabytes of storage on my machine, so I hate that comparison. But anyway, so to test my theory that it's not the PS4 hardware, but it is in fact how the game renders textures or game assets, I copied the game over to my hard drive. The low-res textures is due to how the game renders assets on all platforms. It appears to be favoring SSD performance, or next-gen read speeds, over a standard 5400 RPM hard drive. And also I'd like to note that the PC version also has a hard drive mode, but if you don't select that, the exact same thing happens on PC.
And despite good reviews on PC, the console version of Cyberpunk 2077 did not meet the quality standard we wanted it to meet. I and the entire leadership team are deeply sorry for this, and this video is me publicly owning up to that.
Sorry folks, but I don't buy your apology at all. Despite this apology being predominantly console focused, the game still runs poorly even on PC. It comes down to the game being horribly optimized and unfinished across all platforms. Hell, if Crysis could be ported to PS3, well, that was a horrible port, but the game could be made to run on base PS4 and Xbox One hardware if CD Projekt Red wanted it to. It's clear the game is unfinished. Just because it runs better on PS4 Pro and Xbox One X and next-gen consoles doesn't mean it's actually a next-gen game. I'll get into my explanation a little bit after this. Redesigning the game. Okay, this part is 100% full speculation, but I feel like it's more plausible, so bear with me. It's unclear if the game was redesigned based on the inclusion of Keanu Reeves as Johnny Silverhand, or if he was part of it from the start. There is an article that surfaced recently where an employee of CD Projekt Red stated that the character before Keanu Reeves got involved was actually a lot more scarier, so that's interesting. Anyway, this is where things get a bit dicey, so strap in and hold on. Misdirecting the consumer is and will always be something that pisses me off, but here goes. Every trailer that was released for Cyberpunk 2077 shows or outlines having or including cinematics or cutscenes. But if you played the game, you'll notice there isn't a single fucking cutscene in the entire game. That pathetic excuse for a cutscene at the end of the game doesn't count. So my theory for this starts by comparing the 2018 trailer to Retail. I'm not gonna compare them myself because that's been done before, but you can see there's a lot of changes, be it minor exterior changes, but there's also a lot of fundamental restructuring of the cityscape itself and the look of the environment between the two. Not only would this have taken a significantly long time, but they'd also have to optimize once again for those changes, which they clearly haven't been able to do across multiple platforms. Which is where the second part comes in. This is a big one. I believe that Cyberpunk 2077's narrative shifted with the inclusion of Keanu Reeves as the main character, which would have made CDPR remove all previous narrative functions in favor of providing their new cinema talent with more screen time. This means removing all cutscenes in favor of in-game sequences. Not too sure why that had to be an overlap, but whatever. Effectively turning the game into a brain-dead shell of the original vision. Well, that and the scope of the project must have changed multiple times along the way, which would also explain why the game was delayed for so long. But you get my basic theory here, hopefully. Now don't get me wrong, that's an immense amount of work to scrap, if that was true. Just to redesign a campaign with Keanu Reeves in it doesn't seem very likely, who knows. That might have actually happened. However, it is clear that some major direction issues took place with upper management during the course of development, regardless of COVID-19. A lot of this stuff can be done remotely, and chances are a lot of the dialogue was. At the end of the day, each and every one of us were misled by the dribble that was fed to us by CD Projekt Red this entire time.
Although, believe me, we never ever intended for anything like this to happen.
But it does get you thinking now, doesn't it? That's my conspiracy out the way. Who knows if any of this was true, but they've just opened the doors for many potential legal cases going forward by misleading the consumer and certification board of both Sony and Microsoft into believing the product is in fact gold, meaning completed, which by definition means it's in a finished state, to then getting said product and it being a steaming pile of shit. I'm left with, what the fuck is this? Cyberpunk 2077 is by far the worst PC port I've ever played. Don't get me wrong here, there are locations that seem to run okay, but the second you introduce a bunch of AI, the game goes to shit. People seriously need to stop hiding behind double standards here. If Batman Arkham Knight and Assassin's Creed Unity were both god-awful ports, Cyberpunk 2077 is by far much worse than those. If you don't believe me, I'm gonna say it again, disable your precious DLSS and join the rest of us in complete fucking agony. It's no secret, the game runs like pure garbage, no matter what platform or PC components you have. It's probably important to note, the game was removed from digital sales on the PlayStation Store as of December 18, 2020, which is 8 days after launch. Most likely due to the influx of refund requests and an increase in negative press surrounding the PS4 version, specifically being the worst version out right now. So it wouldn't surprise me if the game actually gets pulled from all online distribution platforms within the next few weeks. CD Projekt Red have drastically changed their core focus, from outstanding PC performance with The Witcher 3 to relying heavily on Nvidia's DLSS or dynamic resolution scaling to mask a disgustingly unoptimized port. I'm not sure how a developer of such prestige on the PC platform went from high and mighty to struggling to optimize their game. My idea of a next-gen game does not start with an 8-year development cycle, regardless of whether that was a concept or prototyping, doesn't matter. To then have promised features completely removed or non-functioning upon release. I don't know where people are getting this idea that this is a next-gen game. If your idea of a next-gen game involves completely broken, buggy, doesn't work, shit, I don't want to live in your world, man. At the end of the day, there's far more going wrong with this game than PC performance, which I've outlined during this video. Until CDPR become transparent with us again, we may never really know the truth about what happened to Cyberpunk 2077 on PC. I'm Brett Madigan, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Also, am I the only one that thinks the contrast level in the Nomad sequence at the start is terribly bright? Like, what the hell is wrong with the contrast level in this game?